Oh, hello, everybody. Bonjour, salut, and welcome to this French GCSE and iGCSE tutorial video. In this particular video, we're going to look at how to approach the role play, which is a very important part of the French GCSE and iGCSE speaking exam. So, just to introduce myself quickly, my name is Dhananjay Talwar. I studied French and Italian for my MA at the University of Cambridge, graduating way back in 2015, and I've been in the field of education since that time, mainly as a full-time tutor, which I've been doing for several years now. I'm extremely passionate about language learning. In fact, I've learned more than 20 languages to different levels, at least 9 of those to fluency. And yeah, I love to inspire my students and to help them to achieve their language learning goals, such as grades in GCSE or iGCSE exams. And so far, I've been lucky enough to help more than 500 different students achieve or exceed their target grade in French GCSE or iGCSE. I have taught a variety of other languages as well to GCSE and iGCSE level, and some, of course, at higher levels too. Okay, so just a quick look at the French GCSE and iGCSE exam boards. So these are correct as of July 2025. So 4 exam boards for GCSE French: AQA, Pearson Edexcel, WJEC Educas, and CCEA. And there are 2 exam boards currently for iGCSE French: Cambridge iGCSE and Pearson Edexcel iGCSE. So it is important for you as a student to be aware of your exam board, ideally as early as possible, so that you can tailor your preparation towards your particular exam board and what you are going to face or come across in your own final exams. Because there are some differences between the exam boards in terms of the format of the exams, the syllabus, and the way the papers are divided up. However, try not to get too hung up on those exam boards. Some or plenty of aspects will remain the same across all exam boards, such as French grammar, large parts of the French exams, the topic areas. There's huge overlap regarding those as well. Okay, and we're looking today at the role play, which is a very important part of the French GCSE and iGCSE speaking paper for all of these exam boards, which are in bold here. So if you're doing AQA, Pearson Edexcel, WJEC Educas, CCEA, or Cambridge iGCSE, then this should be very useful for you, and carry on watching. The only exam board out of those listed that currently does not do role plays is Pearson Edexcel iGCSE. So that's the only exception here. There have been changes for the exams, which beginning from 2026 for AQA and Pearson Edexcel GCSE, 2 of the most common exam boards for GCSE French, which I will touch on slightly later as well. But this material will be relevant for everyone studying one of these exam boards in bold. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What actually is the role play? So the role play is usually, not always now, but normally the first part of the French GCSE and iGCSE speaking exam. And traditionally, for that reason, it was always designed to actually ease students into the speaking test. That does not mean by any stretch of the imagination that you can simply take it easy during the role play and assume that you're going to score top marks or do very well. You do need to prepare for it. You do need to take it seriously and treat it just like any other part of your exams. But the role play was originally intended to be an easier part of the speaking exam. And that's why it was designed, to somewhat ease students into the speaking test. Now, given the exam changes for AQA and Pearson Edexcel GCSE, the role play is not necessarily always going to be the first part of the French GCSE and iGCSE speaking exam. As mentioned, there are differences between different exam boards. So for Pearson Edexcel GCSE, for example, the role play would come second now in terms of the speaking exam after the reading aloud task. But the role play will usually come, if not first, at least very early on during your French GCSE or iGCSE speaking test. Now, what does the role play itself actually consist of? So the role play is an imaginary situation set in a French-speaking environment. This will always be the case. The role play will always be set in some French-speaking environment. That doesn't necessarily have to be in France itself. It could be in another French speaking country. French is very, very widely spoken across the world, which is why one of the reasons why it's such a useful and great language to learn. And you can come across many different imaginary situations in which the role play is set. The student, so as a student, you would always play yourself. The candidate always plays themselves in the role play, so their role never changes. However, the examiner's role can change considerably. The examiner would always play the part of somebody else. That could be, for example, a friend, a waiter, a waitress, a teacher, a police officer. There are many possibilities. So the examiner's exact role can change considerably, and that is definitely something to watch out for and look out for when you're reading through your own role play card. Because on the role play card itself, it should state very clearly what the examiner's role is. And also, as a result, you should also know whether you have to address the examiner using the more informal tu form in French or using the more formal vous form in French. So it is important as a student definitely to pay attention to those differences and whether the scenario is an informal one or a formal one. Because if you're asked to address the examiner directly with a question, you have to know whether to use the informal form or the formal form. And that will depend on the exact situation. This should all be written out neatly for you on the role play card itself, though. The exact scenarios very much vary. For example, you could be speaking to a music shop employee in Luxembourg. The examiner would, of course, play the part of that music shop employee. That's a scenario that came up in 2022 for AQA. Or you could be speaking to your French friend, which came up in 2023 for Pearson at Excel. But in fact, that is a very common scenario that comes up in role plays, simply speaking to a French-speaking friend. Okay, the role play normally consists of exactly 5 prompts that the student must answer. Now, there are differences between different exam boards, and this will not necessarily always be 5 prompts exactly, but that is usually the case. These prompts always typically used to include one unpredictable question, so one question that the examiner would ask the student, which the student was not able to predict or necessarily directly prepare for, plus a question that the student had to ask the examiner. Now, with the reforms, with the changes for AQA and Pearson at Excel GCSE from 2026, I believe this is no longer necessarily the case, but this does vary from exam board to exam board. So it is still quite possible that you would have to respond to an unpredictable question in your role play and ask the examiner a question as well. So that is something to be aware of. And I would always, once you're aware of your particular exam board, I would always check the website and past papers from the website of that particular exam board too. So the examiner always starts and ends the role play. That's always the case. So that, as a student, is something that you don't have to worry about. The examiner would always begin the role play by introducing the scenario, reading out the scenario itself, and they would always round off the role play at the end. In between, the examiner and student will take it in turns to speak, as per the prompts written out on the role play card itself. So the examiner would ask a question, usually, then the student would answer, then the examiner would speak again, the student would answer again, and so on. Just to give you an idea of how it usually works on the actual day as well, for the speaking exam, there will always be some preparation time. The exact amount of preparation time depends on the exam board again, but it's usually 10 to 15 minutes. And during that preparation time, you as a student would normally be sitting in a room, in a separate room, with an invigilator, potentially 1 or 2 other students who are preparing during that time as well. And you would have all of the information required for your test, for your speaking test. Almost, you would have your role play card, you'd have your photo card, and your reading aloud task if you're doing that as well. And you'll be given that 10 to 15 minutes to prepare that material that you have to hand. And it's very important to use that preparation time as efficiently as possible, and to make sure that you that you are as relaxed as possible and as prepared as possible going into the actual test. So you'd sit there for 10 to 15 minutes with just an invigilator, The invigilator's role is simply to make sure that you don't cheat. You're not allowed to check up anything or look up any words at all during this preparation time, although you can usually make notes on a separate A4 piece of paper. Again, those specific details do depend on the exam board, so make sure to check the procedure for your exact exam board. And at the end of that time, you will step into your actual speaking test. The examiner would normally introduce themselves, try and make you feel more at ease by announcing how the test is going to work, perhaps ask a few basic questions in English, potentially even in French, to make you feel slightly more comfortable. Then announce exactly what's going to happen, announce your particular candidate details and their own details as an examiner, and tell you that the exam is going to start. So that preparation time is really vital, and you should try and use that preparation time as well as possible to maximize your marks in the role play as well. And I will go through that in more detail in another video too. Okay, here are my best tips for the role play itself. So make full use of your preparation time. As we touched on, the role play, the preparation time itself is really, really important for French GCSE and French iGCSE. The amount of information that you're given during that preparation time does vary again from exam board to exam board. So for certain exam boards such as CIE or Cambridge iGCSE, you're not given much information about what questions are going to come up during your role play at all. For other exam boards such as AQA, Pearson, and Excel GCSE, for example, you will be given more of an idea of what exactly you'll have to answer during your role play and what you're going to have to say exactly and when. Try and prepare for your role play as carefully and as thoroughly as possible during your preparation time. So if you do have a considerable amount of information on what you're going to have to say and when during your role play, try and mentally script out or think through exactly what you're going to say in French, exactly how you're going to say it, and when you have to say it as well. So you've got almost a mental roadmap of what you've got to say at every single point in the role play. And if you manage to achieve that during your preparation time, that usually means that you're very well set. Try and stay calm. I would spend a little bit of time towards the end of your preparation time, actually just making sure that you're calm, prepared for the situation of the exam itself, and not feeling too overwhelmed. Feeling overwhelmed is very natural. Examiners would expect that as well. And that's why they would also try and make a little bit of small talk before actually starting off the speaking exam itself. There is something about the speaking test from my considerable experience taking French GCSE and tutoring it as well, that does unsettle students, the feeling of being on the spot, as well as perhaps the fact that this is often the first GCSE paper that the student is doing at all, means that the speaking test is often the most nerve-wracking. So I would take a few deep breaths, try and calm yourself down before you actually go into the room for the final speaking exam. Make sure that you answer every single prompt or bullet point. So normally there are 5 of these, but every single one that you have to answer, that you have to include, is given on your role play card. So use that, of course, to guide you. There are marks specifically in the mark scheme for answering every prompt or bullet point, and of course, for giving all the details that you have to give. Usually you just have to give 1 detail for every prompt or bullet point, sometimes 2, but not more than that within the role play itself. It is very important, though, that you give the information that you're required to give and that you do not leave anything out, both in terms of the information you're required to provide and answering every single prompt or bullet point that is there as well. Then it's very important to keep it both simple and accurate. The role play is not the part of the speaking test where you need to show off your French or show off your language. Actually, keeping it simple and accurate is far more important. Making sure that you convey the information that you have to convey and that you keep your French correct, so that there are no needless mistakes within the French. And as long as you do that, you can score towards the top grades for the role play itself. So this is not the part of the exam where you need to chuck in complex structures and vary your tenses as much as possible. You can do that elsewhere in your speaking exam, which I will get onto in other videos, but not in the role play. And as I said, pay attention to whether the situation itself is formal or informal. If it's an informal situation where, say, the examiner just plays the part of your friend, then you would address them using the informal to form. If it's a more formal situation, say the examiner plays the role of a teacher, or somebody else who's in a position of authority, or a stranger, then you should address them using the more formal vous form in French. Those are only relevant when you have to ask something or when you have to address something directly to the examiner, but that can actually come up within the role play as well. Okay, now I'm going to give you a few examples based on actual past papers, role plays from actual past exams. So this first example is actually adapted for the new syllabus from 2026 and the new exam format. This is taken from a sample on the AQA website. This is for foundation tier in particular for the new exams starting from 2026. So you can see that I've written out the examiner's parts, everything the examiner would say in red. And I've put here everything that would be on the candidate's role play card in blue. So this is not actually what the candidate would say. I'll show you that later. This is what would be written on the candidate's role play card. This is the indications that the candidate would have of what to prepare during their preparation time. So I'll give you a bit of time to read over these and to look through this and just point out some features as well. You can see that I've taken the time to write out a translation in English in brackets for everything in French. You can see the examiner and student will take it in turns to speak. The examiner will start, and there is a scenario, which here is a very simple one. You're speaking to your French friend. Tu parles avec ton ami français ou ton amie française. Which will be clearly indicated on the role play card as well. So as a student, make sure that you read through and understand what the scenario itself actually is. The examiner would then start with the first question, the student would answer, and so on. You can see that the questions themselves are relatively simple. They're not requiring very elaborate responses at all. You don't have to go into huge detail. Usually you're just asked to give one detail as a student. And that is important because that is usually how it will be in the role play itself too. Okay, I'm just going to show you, this is the same as before, but I've written in the answers that I would give. So my ideal ideal answers in blue instead. So again, in red is everything the examiner would say. In blue is what I would say if I was the candidate. I'll give you a bit of time again. Everything that's written in French is also translated in brackets in English. I'll give you a bit of time to read through everything here and just point out a few of the features as well. So you can see that I've actually kept the answers. The answers are all in blue, of course, what the candidate could say. I've kept them relatively simple. I haven't used a huge range of different tenses at all. I haven't used very complex grammatical structures. I haven't thrown in different tenses like the perfect tense or imperfect tense, really, or even used things like C clauses or the subjunctive at all. And that's absolutely fine because for the role play, you don't need to elaborate or produce very complex answers at all. The other thing is that I've been careful to include all of the information required. So if I'm required to give one detail, I've given one specific detail about what it is that I have to include, and I've not gone beyond that at all. So I've just stuck to that. If I'm required to give one detail, I've not gone and given two, for example. And that is definitely something I would do because if you give more information than what's required, you risk losing marks if you make a mistake in your French when you're giving that extra information. So just stick to the information that you're required to give and don't go beyond that. You can see that this is largely, the answers are largely in the present tense. Even if I'm required to ask a question of the examiner here, I kept that question relatively simple. Again, I've kept that in the present tense, for instance, and I've used the to form because here the scenario is that I'm speaking to my French friend. So the examiner plays the role of a friend, somebody who presumably I would know fairly well, and therefore it would make sense to use the informal to form. Okay, now one more example. This particular example is for Cambridge iGCSE. So for the iGCSE exam boards, there's no distinction between higher tier and foundation tier. That distinction doesn't exist. So this is just, the one tier for Cambridge iGCSE. Again, I've written out what the examiner would say in red, including the scenario itself written out at the top. Vous entrez dans un château pour faire une visite guidée. Vous parlez avec l'employé, which means you enter a castle to do a guided tour. You're speaking to the employee. And in blue, you'll find the candidates part. This is not what I would say as the candidate, which I'll come on to very shortly. This is actually, these are the instructions that the candidate would have given on their role play card if they were doing this particular role play. Okay, so I'll give you a bit of time to read through those. Again, you'll notice that the role play questions themselves are generally fairly simple. They're often asking for relatively brief pieces of information, such as how many people are there, how many tickets would you like, which tour would you prefer, and so on. And now this is the same, so with the examiner's parts given in red, but in blue, instead here we have what I would say if I was doing this particular role play as the candidate. So my ideal answers are given in blue here. So again, I'll give you a bit of time to read through those. There are translations given again for everything that's in French, in brackets in English too. You'll see that I've kept the answers quite simple, and some of the time within the role play itself, all you'll be required to give is a simple word or two. For example, here where it asks you to greet the examiner, you just have to say bonjour, bonjour monsieur, or bonjour madame, depending on who it is that you're speaking to. You'll see that I've kept the answers relatively simple, and I've really emphasized and prioritized grammatical accuracy above all, as I said before. So there are some conditional tense forms, je voudrais, for example, I would like. Other than that, it's largely just the present tense and quite simplistic French grammar. But that's absolutely fine as long as you haven't made mistakes and you have conveyed all the information you need to convey. Okay, right. So just based on the information that we've seen about role plays, here is a brief quiz. So I'm going to give you a chance to check whether you've memorized the information that we've been over. So the first question, I'll give you a bit of time to come up with an answer before showing you the correct answer for each of these 4 questions. First question is, where is the role play actually set? Okay, going to reveal the answer now. So the answer is that the role play is always set in a French-speaking environment. It may not necessarily be in France, could be in a different French-speaking country, but it will always be set in some sort of a French-speaking environment, and that information should be provided on the candidate's role play card too. Okay, second question. True or false? The examiner always plays the role of the candidate's friend. Okay, I'm going to reveal the answer for this now. This is false. The examiner's role can vary quite considerably. They can play the role of a candidate's friend, but they could also be, say, a teacher, a waiter, a waitress, a shop attendant, and many other potential roles. So again, check your role play card to know what the exact scenario is and the role that the examiner is going to play. And you also need to make sure you're aware of that to know whether the scenario is informal or formal, and therefore which form you should use if you're addressing the examiner to, whether you should use tu, informal, or vous, which is more formal. Okay, question 3. True or false? Again, you should give very detailed answers in your role play. Okay, I'll give the correct answer now. So this is also false. You just have to stick to the information that you're required to give in your role play, nothing more than that. You don't have to give elaborate or grammatically complex answers at all. And in fact, it's not worth doing so. And yeah, there are other parts of the speaking exam where you're better off showing off your language, but not in the role play. Okay, and the final question, number 4. Who is it that always starts and ends the role play? Okay, I'll give the correct answer now. So this is the examiner. The examiner and the candidate take it in turns to speak in between, but the examiner is always the one who starts off the role play and who ends it before going on to the next section of the speaking exam. Okay, so if you have any questions at all or you'd like information about more personalized help, this is how you can get in touch. Don't hesitate to contact me by email, via Facebook, or Instagram. I do post every single day on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn with tips on how to prepare for GCSEs and iGCSEs, how to maximize your marks for languages for GCSE and iGCSE, as well as just sharing my passion for languages naturally with the whole world. I have many resources for French GCSE and iGCSE in particular, as well as other languages. And I do one-to-one classes, group classes, courses, and much more. So don't hesitate to get in contact if you'd like access to any of this.